Baltimore has spent decades trying to solve its most persistent challenge: thousands of vacant homes that hollow out neighborhoods and fuel cycles of crime, poverty, and disinvestment. Their success to date has been spotty, that is, until now. Today, in pockets of the city, new housing is going up, reviving neighborhoods, crime is falling, and leaders say the stars are finally aligned to mount the most ambitious revitalization effort in a generation. Hello and welcome to USA Today's The Excerpt. I'm Dana Taylor. USA Today reporter Andrea Riquier joins us to explain why Baltimore believes this moment could mark a turning point in its long fight against urban blight and how that might translate to other cities facing similar struggles. Andrea, thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, Dana. Thanks for having me.
You sketch the stark divide between places like Park Heights, where revitalization is visible, and Sandtown, where residents say they feel forgotten. Tell us about these two very different neighborhoods.
Sure. I mean, one of the things that I was trying to highlight in the story is how, with such a huge magnitude of vacant homes all around the city, sitting abandoned, there's going to have to be some hard decisions that get made. And some neighborhoods are going to go first, and some neighborhoods are going to have to wait and wait a while. Right now, Park Heights, which just happens to be where Mayor Scott grew up, has been the beneficiary of some money, some revitalization efforts. But I visited another area where they say, they're just not seeing it yet. The strategy that's been identified for tackling vacant homes sounds a little bit contradictory, but you have to sort of go hard but intentional. I think that's the way the councilwoman described it to me. You can't just pick, one house on one block because that's where somebody purchased the home, one neighborhood here. You have to be very sort of going at the problem whole hog, because one of the things that keeps happening is it's not like there's the static number of vacant homes. People are consistently moving away, falling into foreclosure. Homes are constantly coming into the inventory of abandoned homes. But you can't be sort of hard edged and, raising entire blocks, because you want to be very intentional. The mayor wants to be very intentional. This is the challenge. How do you um, do sort of a grassroots, bottoms up, intentional, with neighborhood collaboration strategy that's big enough to actually move the needle?
Mayor Brandon Scott sees this vacancy strategy as a parallel to his long term approach on crime, consistency, patience, and resisting quick fixes. From your reporting, Andrea, is that a fair comparison? And does he have the same political runway to make it work?
The mayor really presided over a really stark turnaround on violent crime in his first term. He's now in his second term. And, there are some people who question some of the numbers, but overall, my reporting seems to bear out that there is this really significant drop in crime. It was hard won. There's a super documentary about his efforts called The Body Politic. Um, and it just really shows how, he identified a different strategy than the sort of broken windows policing strategy that Baltimore had tried before. A lot of people didn't think it was going to work, but another part of tackling crime was not just identifying the strategy, but sticking to it, even when it took a while to see the results. And so, yes, crime is definitely down. Again, there are some questions about how much, but it's down. And now I do think he does have some political capital, certainly from residents, certainly from his constituents, to try to tackle this other big issue. How much political capital he has, how patient some of these other neighborhoods will be, that's the big question.
Some longtime residents you spoke with say they've heard about big ambitions before, but haven't seen meaningful change on their block. What do they share with you?
This is the problem. Again, Mayor Scott is not the first person to come in with big ideas. He's not even the first person to come in with big ideas and some money. I spoke to a woman in Sandtown, the neighborhood we talked about earlier, who said, there were squatters across the street and the homes caught on fire. It can be it can be not just inconvenient but dangerous when things go by in the city.
Baltimore leaders talk about reaching a tipping point where the housing market becomes healthy enough again, that private money flows in on its own. Based on what you heard, how realistic is that idea, and how close or far away is the city from reaching it?
It's a very realistic idea. I mean, we've seen it all over. We see evidence of this sort of ephemeral tipping point, in other places. The question is, how do you calculate it? How do you base financing plans on it? There are just so many variables that are, from the macro to the micro, the state of the economy, the state of other housing markets near Baltimore, all kinds of things that make it just sort of really hard to pinpoint how much public money is going to be needed versus expected private money.
There's disagreement over the size of the appraisal gap. Why is there so little consensus on the numbers? And what does that uncertainty mean for the success of the plan?
Yeah, the appraisal gap is basically what we were just talking about. How much more can a rehabbed property sell for versus what it costs to buy it and then develop it? So right now, maybe there's not quite as much demand, but a very, very healthy, very vibrant Baltimore that looks more like Boston or Philadelphia, for example, that finished home will fetch a lot more on the open market.
A huge part of this plan depends on raising the remaining $1.8 billion from private and philanthropic sources. What are the biggest risks if the money doesn't materialize or if it doesn't materialize quickly enough?
I think that then, you'll be seeing, these initiatives sort of seen as a failure, just like others have in the past. I mean, what I heard over and over as I reported this story is just this time is different because of the scale of the resources we have deployed. If they don't all come together or they don't all come together quickly enough, it could just fizzle.
Andrea, you wrote that there were some moments when violence or distrust derailed redevelopment efforts, like crews refusing to work in Johnston Square. What happened there?
Yeah, really, really compelling story that I heard from this developer who said that, he went into this area called Johnston Square and started to work with one of the local organizers. And, he really prioritized and he really cared about working with the community, grassroots efforts, not doing sort of a top down approach. His development efforts came from when he was a younger man working in a very distressed city called Camden, New Jersey. And he had to sort of convince this woman that, again, this time is real. This time we're really going to make good on these big promises. And she rallied the whole neighborhood over a period of months. And then all of a sudden, there was this little outbreak of drug related violence right where they were due to start the construction. And the crews just refused to start work. And he had to call her and say, "Regina, this is not going to happen." And she said, "You come in here, you say you're a man of the people. You're just like everybody else." And it really took a long time, he said, to repair the trust and say, "Look, it's not that we're not going to do the work, but we're not going to start right now." But in the time that it takes to get things underway in a city like Baltimore where so much is changing, you can lose trust. You can lose people who work for you. He said that happened at his organization, and there can be violence, gun, drug-related violence, or the fires that we talked about earlier.
Areas like Carrollton Ridge, with high levels of fires and other safety issues, seem to be in the most desperate need. How are leaders deciding which neighborhoods get help first and who gets told, essentially, to wait?
I don't know that there is a master plan for the city, and I think that's what some detractors, criticize. I don't know what it feels like to be told from on high, "You have to wait." I do know just driving around talking to some of the people in Sandtown, which we talked about earlier, there's just a lot of frustration. "We're just not seeing it," is what they say.
What are the signs you'll be watching in 2026 that will tell us whether this renaissance is gaining momentum or beginning to stall?
I've gotta be watching for, more money being raised, whether they go to market with, more municipal bonds and how those bonds are received by the investing community, whether philanthropy steps up, whether there's more of a commitment from the state, um, and just looking to see are developers continuing to want to bid on the projects because they believe that there is, going to be a receptive market to sell or to rent their properties into. There's a lot to watch in Baltimore.
And finally, Andrea, how might Baltimore's success translate to other cities struggling with urban blight, or can it?
What's really interesting about Baltimore is that in some ways it's sort of unique, not only for the scale of the abandoned and vacant homes. Some people think maybe Detroit is the only other city that has that magnitude of the abandoned homes. There are other, particularly sort of Rust Belt, industrial Northeast and Midwest cities that have had some blight, like, for example, Pittsburgh. But in some ways, what's interesting about Baltimore is they have this enormous problem, but they're also so well situated right on the Atlantic Ocean, an hour outside Washington, D.C., which has very expensive housing, not too far from Philly, not too far from New York. So if Baltimore can really sort of make some progress on the crime, the vacants, they might hit that tipping point that we talked about, a lot earlier than people recognize.
Andrea Riquier is a USA Today reporter covering housing and urban development. Thank you so much for bringing your reporting on the show, Andrea. It's good to have you here.
Thanks, Dana. Take care.
Thanks for watching. I'm Dana Taylor. I'll see you next time.